So, welcome to the Power Podcast. And I have a really, really special guest here, which I'm waiting for a long time. And Brad Schoenfeld is, for me, it's the GOAT when it comes to evidence-based information due to the topics muscle hypertrophy, body composition, and yeah, I mean, you are a researcher and you are also a really good natural bodybuilding former athlete. So it's so nice that you also have the practical, yeah, background. And yeah, it's so nice to have you on here, Brad. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, Marie.
Yes. So we will talk about body recomposition today. So muscle gaining and losing fat at the same time. And the first question I want to ask you is that possible to recomp the body, so to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time, even when you are an experienced athlete?
Yeah, so certainly it's possible. I can tell you that in our, we carry out, as you mentioned, numerous research studies, and we see it all the time. So there's no question it can happen. There's three primary things that will affect the magnitude, how much you can recomp your body. Number one is the amount of fat you have to lose. So the more fat you have to lose, the easier it is to recomp. As you start getting into lower and lower body fat levels, it becomes increasingly more difficult to recomp. Number two is the level of experience, which you kind of touched on. The people who are naive to training or just starting out, I shouldn't say it's very easy, but it's easier to recomp. And it gets progressively harder the more and more well-trained you are. And number three, what we call the 800-pound gorilla in the room, or anabolic steroids and other anabolics. So if you're not natural, if you're taking enhancement, if you are special supplements, that can affect your ability to recomp. Certainly people who are chemically enhanced can recomp more easily. Can you do it as an experienced trainee? Yes, but it's the magnitude to which you can accomplish that is going to be increasingly smaller. And then, of course, it depends upon what your starting body fat level is. So if you're an experienced trainee, but you've gained a lot of body fat, you can potentially recomp to a greater extent than you can if you're 10% body fat, let's say.
Okay, really interesting. And is that possible even in every age?
So actually, I should have mentioned that it does get progressively harder. Building muscle gets progressively harder as you get older. And to some extent, losing fat does too, particularly for women, because of menopause and how fat is distributed. But certainly from a muscle building standpoint, there are multiple factors that make it progressively more difficult to gain muscle, and thus it's going to be more difficult to recomp.
Okay. Which factors are necessary to even achieve that? So let's take an example. Yes, I am an experienced athlete, like I train like for 5 years dedicated in the gym, and I want to transform my body in terms of looking more in shape, losing body fat, and gaining muscle at the same time to sculpt my shape. So what do or should I take into account? Which are the three main things which I have to consider?
Yeah, so certainly the first and foremost, if you want to lose body fat, you need to be in a caloric deficit. So maintaining a caloric deficit, and generally you don't want to be in too large a deficit, because if you're losing a lot of fat in a short period of time, it's the energy that is required for protein synthesis, which is involved in building muscle, is not available, and thus you're going to have a much more difficult time. So you really want to have a fairly small caloric deficit, and thus it's going to be a longer process for losing body fat. You're not going to get rapid fat loss as well as muscle gain, or it's going to be very difficult to do that. So having the proper caloric deficit, keeping protein intake at higher levels. When I say higher, above 1.6 to 1.8 grams per kilogram, somewhere between 1.6 to 2.0 grams per kilogram of body weight is a good general rule there. Then, of course, having the proper training program, and that's going to be very individualized, but you need to tailor the program to what is optimal for the individual, because there is no optimal program. Only there are certain basic principles that are generally followable or generally advisable. But if you're going to talk about optimizing muscle building, it is specific to the individual. And then, of course, getting sufficient sleep and other lifestyle factors, avoiding stress, and having other factors that can influence, that are what we call covariates to building muscle and losing fat to a degree as well. That needs to be kept in check as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And which are the, yeah, three biggest misconceptions when it comes to transforming and shaping the body in people? I think there's a lot of knowledge and information outside, and sometimes I have the feeling that we get maybe a little bit too detailed and lose the sight for the basics. But yeah, which are in your opinion the three biggest misconceptions?
So dietary wise, I would say that the the myth that you need to reduce your substantially reduce or cut out your carbohydrate intake to go on a very low carbohydrate diet. It ultimately comes down to your energy intake, your caloric intake, and that can be a combination generally of fats, of cutting fats and or carbs, usually both. But keeping carbs very low. Carbs are not specifically the enemy. It's overeating. It's excess calories. And you want to keep your protein, as I said, constant and relatively high. So your other two macronutrients are fat and carbohydrate, and you can be successful with recomping with either. And to some extent, a certain amount of carbohydrate may be beneficial, particularly for building muscle. So cutting it too low actually can be, carbohydrate can be detrimental to that effect. As far as gaining muscle, I think there's a myth that you need to spend many, many hours in the gym. And that is not necessarily the case either, that the quality of your training is going to be the most important, particularly training in a fairly close proximity to failure. So I think that some people mistake the fact, and particularly that you need to do a huge amount of cardiovascular exercise. That ultimately you want to weight train. Some cardio can help to facilitate fat loss, but it is not mandatory. You can recomp with doing minimal or even no cardio. And I'm with that said, I'm not anti-cardio. In fact, I'm a fan of doing cardio. I shoot for 10,000 steps a day, and it's certainly beneficial from a health standpoint. But to lose body fat, you need to do a lot of cardiovascular exercise. And when you do a lot of cardiovascular exercise, it can negate the impact of building muscle. It can interfere, so particularly when you're in a caloric deficit. So it's a nuanced topic, but that's kind of the general rules that I would recommend following.
And how do we keep the balance between this amount of cardiovascular exercise in order to lose fat, but not so high that it's detrimental for our, yeah, muscle gaining?
Well, so that again will be an individual fact. It's going to come down to the individual, and I always hate to give cookie cutter answers to that, because it really depends upon your genetics, where you're starting out at from a body fat standpoint, where you're at as far as your muscle building career, how well trained you are. But what I would say is that it's not mandatory that you need to do cardio from a fat loss standpoint. From a health standpoint, I think there's quite good evidence that having cardiovascular exercise as part of your overall routine is beneficial for you. But I think a minimal amount of cardio from a health standpoint, just focusing on getting sufficient step count in. Like I said, focusing 10,000 steps, And by the way, there's nothing magical about the number 10,000. Could be 8,000, but you want to accumulate a certain amount of cardiovascular exercise. But I would say err on the side of caution ultimately, and that if you're spending hours doing cardio, that you're probably overdoing it. Or when I say overdoing it, you're probably interfering with your capacity to build muscle.
Yeah. Um, I want to ask you a question about the belief system and mindset we have, because in my experience, it may play a big role when it comes to dieting and diet adherence, maybe. In your experience, which role plays the belief system that one maybe has it hard to lose fat or to lose or to look better, I guess. Which impact does it has on the transformation?
Yeah, the mental aspect is always going to be huge. So, and it comes down, you kind of touched on this, results are going to be a function of adherence. I could give someone the optimal program to follow to build muscle and lose fat. If they don't follow it, it's not going to make any difference. So, if you have a negative attitude and you're saying, you know what, I'm never going to achieve this, ultimately you're not going to adhere to the program. So, what I would say is to ensure motivation or to ensure adherence, you need to have motivation. And to have good motivation, you need to have the proper mindset. So yeah, if you're not in a positive mindset, the overriding possibility is you're going to fail in your adherence.
Hmm. And if a person has this negative belief system about their transformation, what would you recommend on changing it within a progress or within a process? I mean.
I think setting realistic goals, ultimately goal setting is to me one of the most important factors in adhering to a program, because you want to have, and you don't want to make it too long term. So you should have a long term goal, but you want to split them up into shorter term goals. Let's say your goal is to lose 25 pounds of fat. That's a long way out. People can get frustrated if you have 25 pounds of fat to lose as your goal, but you break that into, let's say, 6 pounds per month or 5 pounds per month. Those are short-term goals that can be easily realized. And when you achieve that, it gives you more motivation to continue.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Um, how can we support the whole transformation process except from training and nutrition? You said that the nutrition is really, really important, that we have like a slight caloric deficit and we have a tailored training program. But which things can we do to support the whole process? You mentioned a little bit of stress and sleep, and which are your tips? Just have to.
Yeah, so getting proper rest is going to be very important. Um, Having proper recovery between your sessions. I think there's a good anecdotal evidence that auto-regulating, if you're just not feeling it, don't. Sometimes people just get over. I got to train. I got to train. I got to train. They end up getting non-functionally overreached in their efforts. So I think having proper managing your recovery between sessions, avoiding distress, so avoiding stressful. So there's two types of stress. There's eustress, which is good stress. So stress in your life, stress is always going to be a factor throughout life. But there's positive stress that if you get a promotion at your job, there's a stress to that because you have more responsibility. But hopefully that's a good stress. And I think stress management, of managing negative stress, distress, is an extremely important factor, and that's been shown to have effects on certain stress hormones, which negatively affect your muscle building capacity. So I think those are basic lifestyle factors. And I mean, if you want to further, avoiding excessive alcohol intake, smoking, and other negative habits, of course, hopefully, and drug use. That hopefully goes without saying that those are going to have negative effects on your body.
Yes. When it comes to recovery, how can a person feel that he or she needs more recovery, and what do you recommend on, yeah, mm, yeah, making it better, I guess.
Yeah, so some of it is just you got to be in tune with your body, but I think also having a training log and keeping track of your progress over time. If you start seeing, now, everyone has bad days, so if you miss your lifts, if you're going in, but you generally should know what you're able to lift for a given number of reps. And if you start seeing a trend over several weeks, let's say 2, 3 weeks, where that's starting to go down and not vary, but just showing a negative slope, that to me generally is a very good indicator that you're probably need either a deload or some type of alteration in your program.
Hmm. Um, y- which, so what is your, I mean, it's hard, I guess, but a general recommendation for training, how often and how long also should a session be for a person who is maybe a little bit more experienced, or is it too general?
Yeah, that would go beyond that would be a 2 hour discussion in
Yeah.
terms of going into nuances because
Yeah.
program creation and it's not a program isn't static that you just do the same program over and over again. It shouldn't be. It should be fluctuating where you have your goals and your program is staggered in a planned fashion. So I wouldn't want to go into cookie cutter
Yeah.
answers to that, which wouldn't be relevant.
Yeah, I understand. You mentioned in your talk at the Perform X 2 years ago that it's necessary to go to muscle failure, but not to an extent that it's too detrimental. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so I didn't say, I would hope I didn't say that you need to go to failure. I said you need to be close to failure.
Yes.
So training needs to be done with a high level of effort. And actually, I come from the old school, the bro school of every set needed to be to failure and then do forced reps and do drop sets. But I've changed my views over time as new research has come in. And I think the research now is really starting to clarify that for the most part, the majority of your sets, they need to be hard. So you need to be within a couple of reps or so. I'd say 2 reps probably is a good rule of thumb at this point. Could it be 3? But you need to be, depends upon how many reps you're doing, but you need to be relatively close to failure. The last few reps need to be quite difficult to finish. Now, is there a possible need or possible benefit to going to all out failure? I can't completely rule that out. I would say we don't have any evidence of that research wise. Maybe it's just the bro in me that wants to still believe that there might be some benefit. But here's what I would say: if there is, it would be very selectively using failure to overcome plateaus or particularly as you get to more advanced levels, to achieve the maximal effects on your body. I think if it does have an effect, it would be relatively quite small.
Mhm. And if we have like a set on the leg press, and we are having like a rep range of 8 to 10, and we do 6, 7 in a good yeah, with a good tempo, and then we can't do in this tempo any longer, and we hold in the yeah, straightened position, wait and do one more, and wait and do one more, and maybe we can do like 3, 4 more. How beneficial is that, or is it not beneficial to, yes, like ego shoot these reps out, I would say.
So that would be kind of, first of all, we don't have good research on that. You're talking about a variation from what I'm gathering of like a
Mhm.
rest pause type of
Yes.
effect. But there's other, I mean, you also can do lengthen partial part. So you can do a set to failure or close to failure and then do some more reps in the lengthened
Yeah.
phase. There was actually just a study showing that's beneficial. But what you have to remember, again, that would be, and it depends because it would depend upon the total volume that you're doing. Is there necessarily an effect because you're going beyond failure or because it's adding on volume? And if it's because of the latter, because you're adding on volume, how much volume are you doing? At some point, if your total sets, the total amount of volume that you're doing in your sets are high, is adding on that volume going to enhance that? So it's a difficult question to answer. I think there's some evidence that those types of methodologies may be effective under certain circumstances, but there will be, and it depends. And we still have not. I'm a research guy, as you know,
Yes.
and until we get more good evidence on that, it's hard for me to give a concrete answer to that.
Yes, thank you. Um, I have like those lighter questions for for my community, but yeah, do you have like tips in terms of lifestyle for a person who wants to really stay healthy and good looking, like have a huge amount of or a good amount of muscle, not so much body fat, and who wants to stays in this yeah, in this state to be happy, healthy, and also to have a strong body. What do we should consider to go there and also to maintain it?
Well, I mean, we've discussed it. If you're just talking about having a healthy body and a strong and fit physique, consistent resistance training that is tailored to the individual and a healthy diet. I would say that um, from a dietary perspective, focus on whole foods, eating majority of your foods from whole food sources and that are uh, good quality whole food sources. But I generally follow the 80-20 rule that if you're getting 80% of your foods from good whole food sources, you can cheat, if you will, on 20% of pretty much whatever you want. But focusing on getting sufficient protein, good quality protein is extremely important, as I mentioned earlier, for building muscle. Consistent resistance training, very important. Adding in some cardiovascular exercise, whether it's through walking, which is certainly doable, or you could do high intensity interval training. Certainly, it's not. There's other forms of cardiovascular exercise that can be very effective as well. And look, I mentioned also getting proper sleep, avoiding stress, avoiding excessive alcohol intake, and don't smoke, don't take illicit drugs, or certainly keep those to a minimum. I mean, even things like ibuprofen, taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs should be kept to a minimum as well. They've been shown to have potentially negative effects on muscle building capacity, particularly in younger individuals. And then if you're just talking about happy overall life, I would say my general advice there is to surround yourself with positive people who
Mm-hmm.
who also are into a healthy lifestyle.
Yes.
People generally, if you're going to surround yourself with people who have negative outlooks and who are not into healthy lifestyles, that will permeate and that will infiltrate your own lifestyle and have negative effects on your adherence
Mm.
and your happiness.
Yeah. So resistance training stays as the best thing you can do for longevity and also the big role of the diet, right?
Absolutely.
How important is nutrition timing when it comes to the transformation process of gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time?
At best, minimally. So our group has done a lot of work. I can't rule out that it has some. Now, when you say nutrient timing, you're talking about the timing around, there's different ways you can look at nutrient timing, but I think you're talking about like timing around the workout, because you can talk
Yeah.
about nutrient timing as time restricted eating can be another form of nutrient timing, like how you apportion your meals across the day, which has minimal effects as well as a general rule. So, but again, there are some nuances there. But in terms of nutrient timing around a workout, there your body is sensitized to protein intake for 24 hours or more after the resistance training bout. So you can achieve, there is no narrow window that if you miss that window, all of a sudden you're going to go straight catabolic. Now, I generally, if you're a bodybuilder, I think it's beneficial to consume protein as quickly as possible because you want to, there is to some extent, a viable view that you're taking advantage of the anabolic phase that your body, the more you're staying anabolic, eating is anabolic. So the more you're consuming protein, the greater your anabolism. But again, the overall effects, how much effect is that going to have on muscle building? Maybe for a bodybuilder, it may allow you to eke out a small extra gains, which could be practically meaningful in a bodybuilding competition. But if you're talking about the average individual, I don't think it's going to make much, if any, difference on how they think they look.
Okay, and when it comes to structurizing your meals around the day, is there any benefit of doing like mm, smaller meals or bigger meals, or even, yeah, people do like intermittent fasting or fasting periods?
Yeah, I don't. Again, we have some emerging research on this topic, and I don't think certainly there's not good evidence as to one or the other. I think at best there is some relatively weak evidence that having 3 meals a day from a muscle building standpoint, spread out over the course of a day, might, with the protein intake spread out, really it has to do with the protein intake spread out over, let's say, morning, afternoon, and evening, might give you slightly better muscular gains from a fat loss perspective. I don't think it really matters, as long as you're in a caloric deficit, how you're structuring that. But past 3 meals a day, I don't think there's no good evidence that having like and I come from that old bodybuilding school where I used to eat 6 meals a day. I used to have those 6 small portion meals spread out over the day to really not good evidence that has any more beneficial effect than 3 meals.
So it's more individual what you prefer,
Yeah.
because in terms of the bodybuilding scene, I think there's also so for me this kind of smaller meals beneficial or recommended.
If it works for you, that's fine. But if it, like for some people, that would impair adherence. So again, there's no evidence that if it's, look, I'm all for it. If I thought that would get a bodybuilder better results, I'd be all over it. And I did that, when I used to, in my bodybuilding days, that was the bro science that you should be spreading it out, and it had a logical basis. But we have research on that now, and at best it's equivocal, and certainly I don't think there's good evidence that it's more beneficial than doing it 3. It's not going to hurt you, so certainly there's no negative. If in your mind it's going to motivate you, then great.
Okay. Um, you did a lot. I mean, you wrote, I think, over 300 articles about about body composition, about training and nutrition, and in your whole research time, were there like two really huge findings which you not expected, or where you remember that it really changed your attitude and mind around training and nutrition, or even, yeah, like the public view?
Yeah, so you actually just touched on one, which was the nutrient timing. So in my first consumer book, I have a book called The Max Muscle Plan, and in that book, in the first edition of the book, which was 2011, I think, so we're talking now 13 plus years ago, I talked about the importance of nutrient timing and how it really was going to make a difference, that you really needed to focus on that critical window. And as I mentioned, our research, as well as that of some others, has really changed my view, and that I just I at best think it's of minimal importance, and probably for the general public, it's really none. And the other one I would say that's this is multiple ones, but the other one I would say that has really impacted myself in terms of my view and really shocked me, as well as I think my recommendations to trainees, is that you can make similar gains in muscle size across a wide spectrum of loading ranges. So I was taught as a young up and coming exercise science professional that you needed to use heavier loads, that anything over 12 to 15 reps was basically glorified cardio. If you were lifting light loads, that you're not, it's going to be for fat loss, if anything, or just muscle endurance, and that you're not going to gain any muscle from it. And we've done work in our lab, and certainly many other labs have, and we've shown that up to 30 plus repetitions, provided that you are training close to failure. So again, it's not just lifting very light weights and then putting them down. It's those last few reps have to be very challenging. But provided that the last few reps are challenging, 30, 35, perhaps even up to 40 reps can get you similar results to the quote unquote hypertrophy range, which was always 8 to 12 repetitions.
So, so it's more depending also on the person, which what he or she is better in progressing, or what would you recommend? Which kind of rep range should a person like focus on?
So I think from an efficiency standpoint, I would still recommend like that 8 to 12 rep range is a good default just because it's more efficient. I would also say that using very high repetitions is not fun. There's a lot of acidosis, metabolic acidosis that is accumulated, and that causes discomfort, and people, it can impact adherence negatively, and people can put the weights down before they're actually closer to failure. It causes them to potentially not take the sets as close to failure as needed. But I would also say that we don't have good evidence if there may be a fiber type specific effect, and there's some preliminary evidence there may be a fiber type specific effect where lighter loads may predispose your type 1 fibers to greater hypertrophy, and somewhat heavier loads may predispose your type 2 fibers to greater hypertrophy. So I do think that it's not going to hurt you to do it. And I think there's a possible benefit if your goal is optimal hypertrophy to use the majority of sets, let's say in that 8 to 12, but then also have some reps in the 20, 25 rep range to potentially get your type 2, type 1 fibers to target them to a greater extent. And perhaps even some lower reps, some in the 3 to 5, 3 to 6 range for potentially even some greater strength, and as well as potentially your highest threshold motor units.
So you would recommend to combine these rep ranges into one training program, better than periodizing it into like 3 months like a strength block and 3 months like a more higher rep block when it comes to muscle gaining.
Both can be effective strategies. There's not one, so it can be done. I've used both a somewhat of a block periodization type scheme, where similar to what you're talking about, as well as an undulating type of program. And even within a given session, I mean, you could do, let's say, if you're doing a leg workout, you could do let's say 5 reps on squats, and then 10 reps on a leg press, and 20 reps on a leg extension. So many different ways to programming is just a very vast topic that there's multiple ways to go about it, and there's not necessarily a right or wrong way.
Yeah. For me, it was this year, it was really mind-blowing. If I can share it, I had a really I had a really interesting training program before, which was not so I'm a natural athlete, and this program was not for natural and it was really, really high dose of volume. I had like 4 leg sessions a week, 4 or 5, which was about 2 or 3 hours. And then I couldn't improve there. I was just wrecked. And then I changed the system and also the coach, and he cut it down all the volume to 1/3. So just 1/3 of this program, and also changed a little bit of the exercises. And I make like really more progress than before. And for me it was like how because I did really, really less. So my sessions before were 3 hours and now they last like 1 or 1.5, and I do more progress. It's so interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Can you explain why it's maybe sometimes better to do less? I just have to switch on the light just a second. Here I am.
Yes. So there's going to be a tipping point where volume generally is going to follow in what's called an inverted U, where you make you progress to up to a certain amount of volume, and then at some point you're going to level off with the progress, and that's going to be individual. Certain people can handle more volume than others, but at some point it's going to overwhelm your system. You're going to have non-functional overreaching, and that's going to have a negative effect. So
Yeah.
that's very consistent with what we see, certainly anecdotally in bodybuilders and in trainers in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which role plays the mind muscle connection on muscle building? How important is that to feel the muscle really, really good?
Um, when you say how important is it, I personally think it's a beneficial strategy. We don't have our group is the only group that's actually ever carried out a longitudinal study on it, and the results of that study were somewhat mixed. It showed a benefit in one of the muscles and not in another. But I do think that there's some good evidence that it allows you to target a muscle to a better extent. So it is a concept that I do believe in and that I preach. How important is it? I think that would depend on the individual and their training approach and their goals.
Okay. So no general answer. It's dependent on the
Well, I again,
personal.
I do think the general answer is I do think it for bodybuilding purposes. I
Mhm.
think it's generally a good thing. By the way, for if you're a power lifter, if you want to be an athlete for athletic purposes, I think it's a negative. Generally, having an external focus would be preferred. But if
Mhm.
your goal is body enhancement, muscular enhancement, I think there is anecdotally, I think, and from a logical rationale, I think there's a benefit to it. So I generally would recommend using it. Yeah.
What led you personally to compete in natural bodybuilding?
Yeah, it's the old story of starting out as a skinny kid who just was very unhappy with his physique, and I found bodybuilding, or it found me, and we're lifting weights, and I started seeing muscle, and it was like the greatest thing ever, and my self-esteem just went off the charts. And the more I did it, the more I got into it, and I became more serious about it. And it just one thing led to another, and it was my way of kind of showing to myself as to how far I'd come.
Hmm. And so you started like more skinny, and then you were really, really successful. So you won a lot of natural shows. What do you think is the reason for that?
Well, first of all, when you say a lot, I won several shows. I competed, I think, my total competition, I think I did 6 or 7 total shows in my bodybuilding career. But yeah, I won several shows, and my success, I think it's mostly perseverance and just a quest to be the best I could be. And I wish I knew then what I know now. I think I know I certainly could have improved upon my results
Yeah.
back when I was in my competitive days, but it
Yeah.
is what it is.
which are your like, which do you see from your standpoint now as mistakes you did?
Yeah, I think kind of like to what you mentioned previously. One of them was following the routines of my favorite bodybuilders who were not natural bodybuilders, and they had different genetics than I did. And you know, I got results up to a certain point, but I plateaued, and I had to figure out on my own that wasn't the best way to go about training. And I think the other important thing was that I always wanted to have a 6 pack or an 8 pack, and I did not. I certainly should have to put on more muscle. I should have been in a caloric surplus. To optimally build muscle, you should be in at least a slight caloric surplus. And I never wanted to not see my abs, so I didn't let myself do that.
Hmm. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. So to really focus on growth, we have to lose our abs.
Well, when you say lose your abs, you're not going to be shredded. Yeah. I mean, I could have still had quote unquote abs, but they wouldn't have been. I wanted to be shredded. When I say that, lose my abs, I mean that more in a figurative sense, that I would not have had like a washboard where I can
Mm.
literally scrub my clothes on. And I did. I walked around for many, many years, every day of my life with washboard abs, but
Mm.
it limited my muscle building capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that. Good to hear for my improvement season, which will start at the end of the year. So, Brett, do you have a like? It's a it's a easy question for you, but I'm interested in your cheat meal. Do you have like a favorite cheat meal? Because you told me like you were like this 80-20 rule, and which are your 20%?
Pizza,
Pizza.
pizza, no
Really?
question.
Which kind?
Um, Margarita. I mean, I love 4 cheese pizza. Actually, is generally my favorite, but margarita pizza is great. Uh, I mushroom pizzas are great. I different toppings. So yeah, give me if I could, I would eat pizza every day. I don't, but oh, pizza's pizza's God's food as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Okay. And one question also is that yes, for us girls, right now it's a big thing to build shoulders and glutes. And what would you recommend to implement on exercises and to incorporate this goal into the training system? I mean, yeah, dependent on the person, but do you have like favorite exercises or recommendations when it comes to the frequency of the training?
Well, and which muscles did you say? Shoulders and glutes?
Shoulders and glutes for the girls,
Um,
right? For the
Again,
skinny girls.
as far as recommendations for training, that's going to be very individual. It would be a disservice to give comments on that, because it would depend upon how the routine is structured. If you're asking me favorite exercise, certainly for shoulders, the focus should be on the medial,
Yeah.
the middle head of the deltoid, the lateral deltoid, and that would be abduction. So doing variations of uh, lateral raises. And for me, if you're asking me my favorites, it would be either a cable lateral raise or a machine lateral raise. Dumbbell is really not the best exercise because there's very little tension in the beginning of the movement where the muscle is in its stretched position, and that is a very important part of the movement. So yeah, variations on the lateral raise, particularly I love the machine lateral raise machine, but a cable lateral raise is certainly just as effective. And for glutes, I'm a big fan of walking lunges, or in lunges, Bulgarian split squats in general, or because they put the glutes in the stretch.
Mm.
And but it's a combination. I would be remiss. I know my best buddy Brett Contreras would kill me if I also didn't mention that. I think the hip thrust is a terrific exercise, but with the glutes, it really comes to a multitude of exercises because the glutes have um, multiple functions, and they have you have your gluteus medius, gluteus minimus, and of course the maximus. So doing abduction, either seated or cables, so moving the leg out to the side, is important for the medius. And having a more well-rounded program. I should mention also with the shoulders, like I said, the lateral delt. Number one, it's the most important, I think, from a physique standpoint because it gives the illusion of width. Your front delt and your rear delt don't. But of course, they're important for your physique. I would just say they're less important because when you're doing like chest presses, shoulder presses, flies, dumbbell flies for the chest, your anterior delt gets a lot of work. So generally speaking, I don't think the anterior delt needs to get direct, like front raises to me is kind of superfluous for most people. I very rarely, if ever, see people with weak anterior delts. Now, it can happen for some women sometimes because some women avoid doing chest exercises under the misguided perception it's going to make their breasts smaller or other reasons. But I think that's kind of silly. But if you're not doing a lot of chest exercises, then that might increase the need. And then your posterior delt would be like face pulls and other exercises. They can be very important, but again, they're going to get worked if you're doing rowing movements and other variations. They're going to get a lot of work in with those movements, whereas your lateral delt really does not get much indirect work.
Mm-hmm. So for the delts, you recommend laterals on cable or machines, and you said that hip thrusts are a terrifying exercise. What do you mean by that?
A terrific exercise.
Terrific. Yes.
Yeah, they're not terrifying. They're terrific.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, again, they're good to me. The glutes, because of the complexity of the muscle, you need to combine different exercises. So the hip thrust can get more in the shorter length aspect, and as well, it just is it's a different movement pattern. So I think working the muscle in different angles, I think
Yes.
can help to spur
Yeah.
more growth.
Yeah. Okay. Um, which are the topics you research now on? Which are your main topics you dive into right now?
The majority of the work we do is on resistance training variables. So we look at different, your sets and reps and frequency and rest intervals, but we also look at like specialized techniques. We're doing a lot of work now in supersets and drop sets and other specialized techniques like that. And my interests are very wide ranging. So we do some nutritional stuff, some acute work, and they're just very vast. Most things that are involved with the pursuing how you can optimize hypertrophy and strength will be within our purview.
Okay, so you don't have like a specific question you work on right now. It's more the overall.
The questions will change each semester. So we just finished up a Lenten partial study. We're going to be doing a failure study in the fall, as well as a training technique study. We have two studies that are going to be going on. So each semester, our topics will be a different topic.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Brad. Thank you so much for your time and your answers. And I really like that you don't give these general answers. Um, because yes, you come from the research and it's I think what is most important to hear out of that it's really, really individual and you cannot give like common answers. And I hope everyone gets this out of it because yeah, everyone has another history and a, another goal maybe and another background in genetics. And so training has to be individualized and not generalized. So yeah,
Well
thank
said.
you so much. Yeah.
My pleasure, Marie.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a good pizza this week.
Thank you. Ciao.
Thank you.